So joining us now to discuss this further is Jamie Jenkins, independent statistician and political commentator, known famously as Stats Jamie on social media. Jamie, great to see you. Just explain to us why this conclusion has been drawn in terms of the inefficacy of these COVID passes.
Yeah, so good morning. I suppose it's probably worth just covering a little bit of the history on this. Mark Drakeford, the Welsh First Minister, very early last year was saying that he didn't think it was the role of government to bring these kind of vaccine passes in. And then time went on. And a bit like you've got SAGE in England, I live over in Wales, and we've got a technical advisory group that gives advice to the Welsh government on such matters. And ahead of this vote and ahead of actually being voted into kind of law in Wales, the advice itself actually said that even with careful planning, there may be no net benefit to these kind of vaccine passes. They actually said that some studies suggested that bringing them in, it could actually backfire, because when you bring these in, you could get certain parts of the population less reluctant to come forward for vaccination because they're wondering, well, what's the government doing here? And just it kind of increases the distrust in government. So that was the history going into the kind of the vote, and there was no real evidence to support them. And then obviously they came in. Now we've seen these vaccine passes across, not just in Wales, they then came into England. They're still in force in some countries now for travel, that you need to go and see them. But if we just look at what actually happened with the data here, we said, as you touched upon there, that you had to show proof of vaccination to enter the nightclubs. What happened not long after that? They closed the nightclubs because COVID cases were going up. Now, the vaccination certificate, or the COVID pass is what they were calling it as well, it also may have meant that, because we know that the vaccine itself doesn't stop the spread of the virus, it may have actually meant that some people who were maybe perhaps more vulnerable went to events because thinking that they were bomb-proof from catching COVID because of this way the vaccine pass was kind of presented. And then those who were unvaccinated actually had to get proof of a negative test to go into such events. So they may have actually been safer to have been around. So the health minister, I think, and the opposition leader, Andrew Davies, yesterday was saying that she has confirmed to him that there's no evidence to prove that they did anything, which kind of confirms what the government were told potentially would be the case beforehand.
This whole saga has concerned me a lot, because for a couple of years we really put all our faith and we put our lives in the hands of epidemiologists whose sole job is to study the spread and the pattern of diseases in a population. And I have to say, they really don't seem like they've covered themselves in glory. What does that say about the scientists who had so much power during COVID?
Well, yeah, there's been some scientists who have been kind of cancelled for some of their views over the last couple of years. I was doing plenty of tweets back end of last year, early this year, where we were looking at the modelling that was done. The good thing we had when Boris kind of rejected the calls from further restrictions is we had modelling, which for the first time said that if you don't do something, this is what will happen. And Boris didn't do something. So for the first time, we could then actually see, OK, let's see if what you are predicting does actually happen. And the modelling was way out. And you've still got people now calling for kind of more restrictions on lives. This week, we had the leaders of two health journals writing to the government to call for more restrictions. Now, ironically, around the time of that letter, if you look across England and Scotland now and Wales, the current wave of COVID is starting to decline. And I called this about 3 weeks ago on social media. I put a video up because naturally we saw it go in Portugal and South Africa. We're a little bit behind with the current wave, went up for 4 weeks, started coming down. So it doesn't take a rocket science to look at the actual data from other countries and predict what probably will happen here. And it's exactly that. But we are still getting scientists or epidemiologists or sometimes just activists calling for more and more restrictions, which are not really justified.
Found this story incredibly good news, Jamie, as you would know, because I've always been vocal for the last 2 years about the insanity of making a teenager, particularly that was at no mortal risk from COVID, take a drug which may cause them short or long-term illness or discomfort in order to go to a nightclub. Like the craziness of that kept me awake at night. This is no exaggeration to say that. As we head into this autumn, do you think these findings in Wales will put to bed the concept of mandatory vaccination for entry into anywhere this winter, this autumn? Because they were already on very thin ice with these sorts of protocols. Does this put it to bed? Is this going to be the end of them, do you think?
I think so domestically. I can't see them ever coming back into the UK now. There's no real appetite in the UK government to do this. We've got this living with COVID plan. The health minister saying they didn't kind of have any effect, really. There's no evidence anyway of any effect. And I think ultimately what we do know is that obviously the vaccinations themselves, for the most elderly people, yes, they you can see that probably a need for that, and which is why we've got the booster rollouts for elderly people. But I think you're right there in terms of younger people. The vaccine doesn't stop the spread. And for most young people, going all the way up to kind of middle age, if they do catch the virus, it's kind of a mild disease for most of them, even with or without having booster vaccines and fourth vaccines and stuff. So I think, this has probably killed this one off now. But remember that we still have this in force across some countries. If you go to Spain now, you still have to show that you've had a booster vaccine, or you've got to pay for tests to go into some countries. The world needs to wake up. Even things like Australia now have scrapped the vaccination requirements for entry and things. So we still have them in some parts of the world. It's time to get on and time to move on with these things.
All right, thank you ever so much, Jamie Jenkins there. Follow him on Twitter @StatsJamie.